This is Tracy. And before I get started in this video, I wanted to address just like one quick thing. So I feel like in the last couple of videos that I've posted, I've been a little like monotone, I feel like, and not as like energetic as I normally have been. And it's not because I'm in a bad mood or anything like that. I noticed, and no one commented, but I just want to like address it. It's just because I'm getting used to like my 8 to 4 job. I haven't been on a routine since student teaching where I was like in that like type of routine. So I'm just getting used to it, and it's just like a bit of an adjustment, so I'm not like angry or upset. I actually really love it. The job is like going really great, so thanks for everyone who like gave me love, because I really appreciate that. So today in this video I want to talk about a very important subject matter, and that is anti-synergies. And if it's something I absolutely cannot stand, it's anti-synergies. And a lot of times what I've noticed is when I was in modern, I got a lot of opinions from people, and I don't want to say that they weren't good opinions. I just felt like I relied a lot on other people to give me advice for things, and I don't really like that. I felt like I was getting a lot of opinions and they were very overwhelming. Like back when I played, I don't remember what pre-release it was, I built my deck and I was not happy with it because I felt like everyone was like telling me what to build. And I could do a whole separate video on this because it was actually like, it made me like really upset and I was exhausted. It was like a midnight pre-release and my body cannot function at that hour. It was not good at all. And it was not a great type of thing. And how did I get on the subject matter? Oh yeah, so like people were kind of like telling me like how to build my deck, and this was like a major thing too when a lot of people were giving me advice with decks, and I learned to kind of take things with like really a grain of salt. And even like videos I film, like it's like nothing is law, I mean that I say, and like you can take it as, you know, you can take it however you want. I mean really, I don't feel like I ever sound like super elitist, like this is how it is and this is what I believe. At least I try not to. But one thing that a lot of people would really kind of encourage me to do without realizing it, I think, is anti-synergies. They would be like, you should run this card and this card in your sideboard, and I was like, but they don't work. So let's talk about first what I mean by anti-synergies. And I think the best way I can kind of phrase this is by giving an example. So let's talk about these two cards. Say you have both of these cards in your sideboard. You have Stony Silence and you have Spellskite. This is an example of an anti-synergy because say you're playing against the affinity matchup and I don't know why you would bring in Spellskite, I really don't even know why, but say you did. This is not like a great example, but it's a good one that I can try to phrase it with. So you have Spellskite and then you also bring in Stony Silence because it stops your affinity opponent, right? These cards don't work together, right? Because Stony Silence reads that our activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. So you literally cannot use Spellskite's ability. It doesn't really make sense. It's an anti-synergy. Why would you want to run these cards together? You shouldn't. That's the way it should be, right? You shouldn't want to run these cards together. So this is a major thing that I would definitely be aware when you're deck building, is especially with your sideboard. Be very careful when you're constructing your sideboard because you could unintentionally have some anti-synergies, and then after you're playing, you're like, wait, I'm putting this card in to stop my opponent, but it's also hurting me. This is a really difficult thing, I would say, to define in deck building, because I've been thinking a lot about the nature of deck building recently. I mean, I filmed a couple of videos recently on, well, not a couple, like filmed like one recently about deck building, and how people may not be aware of these things right away when they're building a deck, but then after you test it, you're like, wait, these two cards do not work together at all, because you need to define a line. You need to find a line between stopping your opponent, but also progressing your board state. So, a card like Stony Silence doesn't progress your board state, it just stops your opponent, which is a really good card. It doesn't do anything for you though, in terms of, it doesn't help you progress. I mean, I guess it can kind of help you progress your board because now you can stop a lot of your opponent's creatures and artifacts from doing things, so you have more room and more opportunity to play out more of your board. So just totally be aware of it, just be aware and really fix those sort of errors when you're playing, because you may unintentionally put them in and you may not even be aware of it. This requires a lot of playtesting. I mean, really, I would just say ultimately everything I think requires playtesting. I think it requires a lot of time to really do that. Like I say this all the time when I build my mock deck decks that I film videos on. I was like, I haven't played with this deck, I don't know how it's going to play out. You know, it may play out not great in certain areas, but certain areas it will, so, you know, just be aware of those things when you're playtesting. What does this say? What? What does this mean? Comb through deck to see what works well. I don't even understand. Okay, I don't really know what this means, but I'm gathering a sort of general idea from what I'm trying to say. So there may be some not anti-synergies, some really good synergies that you want to be aware of that you're like, oh wow, these two cards really work well together. Let's look at the card Liliana of the Veil, which is typically associated, I would say, mostly with Jund decks. A lot of them are running the newer Liliana, but I think for this purpose of this example, I do want to talk about Liliana of the Veil. Also, some Jund builds are actually still running Liliana of the Veil, or some are even doing like a mix between the two of them. So you have a card like Tasigur, right? Tasigur is fantastic. I love Tasigur. My baby, I love this card. So you have Tasigur, right? And you notice when in the build, you're like, wow, Tasigur and Liliana work really well together because Liliana puts things in your graveyard, and Tasigur gets those things back from the graveyard. So you're like, wow, that's a really sweet synergy, and that's the type of direction that you're going to want to go in. Say you have a card that really wants to hate on your graveyard, a card like Rest in Peace. Why are you going to run the card Rest in Peace when you have this fantastic synergy with Liliana of the Veil and Tasigur? So basically, what you want to do is instead of a card like Rest in Peace, you'd want to run a card like Nihil's Spellbomb. I really love this card. I think it's really fantastic. A card like Rest in Peace kind of permanently stops the graveyard, I would say. And I use the word permanently pretty loosely because keep in mind that your opponent could just run like cards to destroy it, like Abrupt Decay or something like that. But Rest in Peace is really good if you're not doing any graveyard synergy yourself. So this is a really good example of an anti-synergy because why are you running Rest in Peace? Because it may be stopping your opponent's board because say they're running like cards like Snapcaster Mage or whatever or Tarmogoyf and they want cards in their graveyard, but it doesn't help you out because it's stopping your really fantastic Tasigur synergy because you want cards back with Tasigur. So then let's talk about a little bit like sideboarding. I've talked about sideboard a lot recently too, and so say you're trying to figure out your sideboard, and I think why sideboard is such a difficult thing that really messes a lot of people up is they kind of section off cards and say this card's bad in this matchup. So say a card like Tasigur, let's say Liliana of the Veil in that example is really bad in that matchup because I don't know, whatever reason, it's just bad in that matchup and you realize that you really want to take that card out. So you may say, okay, sweet, I want to take out Liliana, and in your head, you section Liliana off as not being a great card in that matchup. So you take that out and then you're looking at the rest of your deck and you're like, I don't know what else to take out. So look at that synergy and look at the synergy between Tasigur and Liliana and say they have really good synergy. Maybe I'd want to cut one of my Tasigurs, maybe not all of them, but maybe some of my Tasigurs, because that synergy with Liliana and I'm not saying it's the best synergy in the world, I'm just saying it is pretty great synergy and I think it works out pretty well. So it's a good thing to do, I think, if you're struggling with what cards to take out in your sideboard, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to keep, one or the other. You'd want to take like both of them out because they have good synergy. Like they're good enough on their own, but they work really well together. That's not like the best example. I can't really think of like a better example off the top of my head right now, but it's just like a general example of like things to say that you want to keep in. Like another example too, maybe this is a little bit better and maybe explains the point a little bit clearer, is you're running Snapcaster Mage and say your build, you don't have that many instants. Say you take out a lot of instants and you put in more creatures, Snapcaster Mage becomes less valuable in that instance, right? Because Snapcaster Mage can't get that many instants and sorceries back because you can't flash them back. So yes, is Snapcaster Mage a great card? Absolutely, it's a fantastic card. However, in that matchup, when you're figuring out your sideboard, you'd want to like take those sort of things out. Because what happens if you only have, with sideboard, 10 instants and sorceries and 4 Snapcaster Mages? That math doesn't really work out in your favor very well. So, yeah, that. Oh, okay, here's another anti-synergy that I don't think a lot of people realize, and I've actually talked about this example pretty recently in a couple of videos. This sort of thing drives me really crazy. So I've talked about the card Vendilion Click a lot, and I really like Vendilion Click. However, I've always said that this is a one of in my head. I never really like to run more than one of this card. However, I am planning on doing a fairy build in the future. That's on the list of deck tech videos that I really want to do because I really like fairies as a deck and I've really wanted to do a video talking about that color combination and Bitter Blossom, because I just think that's going to be really fantastic. I'm really excited to do that deck tech, which, by the way, minor total shameless self-promotion here. Follow me on Twitter, because I am going to be posting Facebook polls as to what deck tech I'm going to be filming next. So if you want to be a part in that, I'm going to film a lot of them. I'm going to film them all like eventually. It's just a matter of like what deck tech next. So if you really like my deck techs, just, you know, follow me on Twitter so you can be a part of that and check out my poll. Because for when I did my Modern Sultai build, that was voted on by Facebook. That was like the #1 deck that people wanted to see currently. So yeah. So anyways, so say you have 2 Vendilion Clicks, and I really don't like this card as a 2 of or more. Again, except for like in fairies, I'm probably gonna do that. That's gonna be like my exception. But in like normal like modern control or mid-range strategies, I'm not really a huge fan of that. So basically, say you have 2 Vendilion Clicks in your board, right? And you have Tasigur on the field. Say you have 1 Vendilion Click on the board and you have 1 Vendilion Click in your graveyard. That's a really terrible anti-synergy. And another thing too is, this is especially important if a lot of your build requires things to go in your graveyard. Like you're playing like Thought Scours and Liliana of the Veils, and you're discarding cards and you want cards in your graveyard. This is the kind of strategy that I'm talking about for this specific example. So it may be a really small thing that, again, that's what a lot of anti-synergies and synergies are. Very small, intricate details that you can miss. You can miss this all the time when you're deck building and all the time when you're doing your sideboard, which is why you need to be super careful about it. And why I'm saying you need to do a ton of play testing. So here's what happens in that situation with that Vendilion Click Tasigur example. Your opponent says, well, that Vendilion Click is pretty useless for you, right? So I'm just gonna you know, have that card go to your hand. And really, let me actually phrase this situation, this hypothetical situation where your opponent has 0 cards in their hand, because that's why Vendilion Click would be a really useless card in that situation. Like say they're playing like Burn and they just have no cards in their hand and all their deck is basically like instants, so like they're gonna just cast their instants in response to you Vendilion Clicking them. I'm just gonna give that theoretical example about why it's not going to be good, because in some situations that can actually be in your favor, because then you can keep flashing in Vendilion Click and then you can, you know, keep doing that thing to where you see their hand or whatever. That could be a realistic example, but in this hypothetical situation, let's just say that they have 0 cards in their hand. So in this particular example, it's a really terrible anti-synergy, because then they just get your Vendilion Click and you're like, oh, okay, cool, I guess I like have to get this Vendilion Click back, and then it's like a dead card in your hand. Or even a card like Thoughtseize or Inquisition, where they have no cards in their hand. If they're playing that sort of strategy, when you're sideboarding, those may be cards that you want to take out because your opponent dumps your hand frequently. And a lot of times when you see cards, when they run Thoughtseize and Inquisition, a lot of people run like 6 or 7 of those cards, which to me is too much. I've never really been a fan of 7. 6 is kind of my number, but I've done 5 in the past, and I've also done 4 in some builds. I've done 4 in more mid-range builds where I don't have as much removal, and I did 5 I think when I played black-white tokens, and I was kind of a huge fan of that. Just had like an adequate enough removal for me, which I was a huge fan of. So again, it's just very small details that you just definitely need to be in mind when you're deck building. I would just avoid anti-synergies as much as you possibly can, and you know, sometimes they're not apparent, sometimes they're not obvious. In that first example that I gave you about Stony Silence and Spellskite, that's a pretty, I would say, like, you know, simple example enough because it's pretty obvious, but there's certain things like that Vendilion Click example where you're like, Vendilion Click's a great card, I want to run 2 of it, but then you realize that issue with Tasigur that you may have in certain matchups, and you're like, Vendilion Click's actually really not a great card to do 2 of. Maybe I'd want to sideboard one of them out. So yeah. Yeah guys, that was it for talking about anti-synergies, in Modern, and also some like synergies and like sideboard stuff. I don't really know what I'm going to call this video because I kind of talked about a lot of different things. I hope this was helpful, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.